Let's address the most controversial question when it comes to public speaking. Should I memorize my speech? Good hook. It's all over the map. It's crazy. So here's what I do, and then I'll give some tips in regards to that. If I'm doing a workshop like this, I don't memorize it. I know the concepts that I'm teaching on, because to memorize it, and then you have a conversation, or somebody says something profound, you get off on a tangent, then you've got to remember what it is that you were covering. So have some notes handy if you're doing something highly interactive. If I'm doing something that is sort of an interactive, long kind of keynote, I'll memorize certain parts of the things that are very important, quotes or alliteration or certain phrases that I really want to get down. But especially with a personal story, I know the personal story. So I don't really have to memorize that. I rehearse it a lot so that it's fluid, but also then I can adjust on the fly as I need to. If I'm doing a competition, or even if I'm doing a Toastmaster speech, many times I'll memorize it because there's a time limit. I don't want to get clapped down because I decided to say a couple other things. And a competition, you're a second over, you're disqualified. So then I just memorize it word for word. And with a lot of shorter speeches, I will memorize completely. Now I have an acting background, so it's easy for me. Now, usually what I hear from people about memorization, which I'll address first, is, oh, I don't want to memorize it because then it sounds bad. Or I don't want to memorize it because I'm afraid I'll forget. Or I don't want to memorize it because then it sounds rehearsed. Everybody on your sheet of paper, this is where I usually draw it on the wall, but I want you to draw a mountain, and then down, and a valley, and then another mountain. So like two peaks, two mountains. It looks like an M, right? Unless you want to make it creative and have like craggly cracks and draw a little tree in there or something. Now draw yourself climbing up that first mountain.
We've had different kinds of trees.
And in the valley, we're all going to compare artwork. In the valley, this is the valley.
So strange.
We'll talk about gestures later. In the valley, I want you to write the Valley of Death.
Oh.
You're like, what?
That escalated quickly.
I feel like you're never going to draw this again. You're always going to get people to draw themselves.
I know.
Your mountain is so sharp.
Although, if you want to balance it out, that second peak, the peak on your right, you can call it the peak of happiness. I just thought of that. So.
I mean, you already did. How you get back?
You know there's another one.
No, you just don't want to stay in the Valley of Death. All right. So what happens is at the bottom where you are, kind of climbing up that mountain, is your speech. You're working on your speech. You're going up the mountain of the speech. If you draw halfway up that mountain like a little house where you can kind of camp out in, and you're like, oh man, I'm really tired.
Or like a tent?
Or a tent halfway up that first mountain. That's where you want to kind of get to if where you're familiar with the speech, you know the speech, you can do the speech, and it's going to feel more like, it's going to feel conversational, it's going to feel a little raw. This is where a lot of people land on if they're public speaking. The good thing with that is that you have the material and you can deliver it, and you can deliver it usually in a pretty good way. The downside of that is that sometimes you're going to forget something. Maybe you're going to forget a point. Maybe you're going to forget something profound. When I gave a speech at Advanced Orators, I forgot my whole summary of the points I was going to give until halfway through the speech. And then I went back and said, oh, by the way, and I had to go back to make that train. But the train had to back up and go forward again, which does make it a little more confusing. Same thing with the speech I gave last Wednesday. There were some things that I forgot that Aaron had mentioned, and I'm like, oh yeah, I knew that. Because I didn't have it memorized and I hadn't gone through it enough. So the problem then is that there could be gaps. But it's a good place to be. If you can't get to memorize it, it's a good place to land on. And if you're really afraid of memorizing, it's a good place to land on. What usually happens with people is you get to the peak of the top and you say, hey, I haven't memorized. Because what happens is you sat down in your living room and you laid on your couch and you went, once upon a time, blah, 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 go out and change the world, thank you very much. And you're like, oh, I memorized my speech. And then 2 hours later, you give it. And now you're standing in front of people and they're all staring at you and somebody sneezes and the weather's kind of warm and there's traffic going by behind you out the window and you go, I forgot everything I just learned 2 hours ago. Because it's still in your short-term memory. And it's just like riding a bike, where if you're riding a bike and finally the training wheels come off and you're doing this and somebody says, look at the birds, and you go, I can't, because you're just afraid of not falling off the bike. After you ride a bike for a while, you go, oh yeah, bird, oh, pothole, right? Oh, look, another bird. That's where we want to get to. So what happens is when we're standing on that first peak and we think we have it memorized, what happens is we fall into the valley of death, because we haven't actually memorized it. We've just kind of rehearsed it enough to get it into our short-term memory. So now I've got to climb the second mountain, which is practice, 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 practice. We got to get through the valley of death to get to the top of the second mountain, where if you're going on a roller coaster and you're sitting next to Aaron, and Aaron says, quick, give me your speech starting with point 2. And you don't go, Aaron, go away. You say, okay, boom, and you start and you finish that speech as you're going through the roller coaster. Maybe your vocal variety is a little different on stage, but you know the speech. Or you're doing the dishes, or you're vacuuming the rug, or you're walking your dog, or whatever it is you're doing, and you just go, I'm going to go through my speech. And you just go through it. You're not going through it as if you're presenting it, because if you're like, oh, I've got to get the stupid eggs off the pan. Maybe your speech is like this, even though it's a funny story, and you're like, stupid eggs. But you're going through the speech. So the emotion and the words are not connected at this point. But you're just going through the speech. You know it so well that you can do it in any emotion, in any setting, at any time, in any speed, in any vocal variety, however you see fit. It's become now a part of you. That's what the point, and usually that takes, depending on the length of the speech, I go through it a minimum of 20 times. I usually coach people and tell them to go through it 50 times or more. Well, as soon as you say, I have it memorized, sitting on my couch in complete relaxed bliss, now you've got your work ahead of you. You've got another 50 times to go through that speech. The beautiful thing is while you're memorizing it, you're going, Now you're like, have it memorized. Now you can kind of go about your day while you're going through your speech. And I usually have it as paper or in my phone, where if I'm walking my dog and I'm kind of going through it, and I'm like, oh shoot, where was I? My dog just pooped. I forgot my point. And I can pull out my paper and go, oh yeah, this is my point. So you're still going to be a little bit distracted, but now you're going through it and it's not going to take up time from your day. You're just incorporating it into your day. And then you set aside time beyond that to actually then go through it and like you're actually delivering. And then pretty soon it just becomes a part of you. That's what really good actors do. If you're on Broadway and you're doing a show and you've done the show 385 times, people don't leave that show hopefully going, that seemed a little over-practiced or over-rehearsed. That was a little stale. Like, no, they're drawing people in through laughter and tears and written by somebody else, but they've owned it so much that it becomes real and natural for them, just like writing that book. So if you go to that length of memorization, which I encourage you at times to do, I actually encourage you to do it more often than not, especially if you're new. Unless you're really afraid to do it, then start with kind of those concepts. But it really is a great way to train your brain, because then when you stand up and you're ready to give that speech, somebody sneezes, there's traffic behind you, whatever it might be, you just go right with the flow. And then if you do need to go off because you're like, oh, I think of a joke, I can tell right now, you're not losing your place. You're going right back to where you were. And if it starts to feel a little over-rehearsed, change it up. Instead of moving right, move left. Instead of shouting, try something different. But you know it so well, you can do that on the fly. And then it becomes fresh and new. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So through the valley of death, about 50 more times, and we'll be there. As far as preparation in terms of delivery goes, there are those moments when you're walking your dog and going through their speech. There's also times when you're going to want to block out your speech. And I didn't bring a speech with me. Does anybody have a written speech on them? It's a minute of actually, like, come on guys, bring your speeches. So here's what I'll show you. Let's say this is my speech. I'm plagiarizing Leila's speech. Here's what. Do you have any questions on that so far?
I just had a quick comment.
Yes.
The last speech that I did, Raj asked me the night before to please do a speech. So the next day I practiced, and I practiced in this one spot in my living room that's about 8 feet, maybe a little bit longer. And I went back and forth, and I used that full 8 feet so well. Then Alana saw it. Alana was my evaluator, and that was the one thing she called me on. I used the exact same space on that stage. But she said she did amazing. She had fulfilled her objectives, but she did it in this space. And I knew that was going to happen in advance, but I didn't have a lot of time to go through and practice it in other places. But it was exactly, I thought maybe it wouldn't happen just once, but it did. So that's another good reason to practice it in multiple areas. But don't practice your speech while you're driving. It's dangerous.
Just to add, Tiffany, I agree that to practice in many different areas, and then you will feel more comfortable. And for me, in each of my speech, I practice at least 10 times because it will help you more confidence on the stage as well. Even though you might forget some points, but you will come up with something. You won't be like, what I'm going to say. Yeah, so practice at least 10 times, it helps.
It does. And I've been on stage a lot of times and I've forgotten what I have to say. And afterwards, people will be like, oh, nice speech, whatever. I mean, thank you. And inside I'm thinking, I completely forgot, like, those 6 lines that I had in my speech. And I had to sort of weasel my way through it. But if you know the content well enough and you know the direction you're going, it's just like driving from point A to point B, but somewhere in the middle there's construction, you still know where you're going. And so you're like, okay, I know I got to get there, and I forgot how I was getting there, but I know where I need to go, and you can bridge that. And really, actually, memorizing your speech helps you do that, because you know it so well. I've been on stage as an actor before, where the lights go out, something technically goes wrong, somebody else forgets their lines, I forget my lines, but we still know where the scene has to go. So you kind of wing it until you get back onto it, and the audience doesn't even know. Well, if the lights go out in the middle of the scene, then the audience usually knows there's a technical glitch. But as far as an actor goes, then you can move forward. There was once when I completely blanked, and I was looking at my actress I was working with on stage, and we're in an argument. And she said something, and I'm supposed to say something back, and I go, I have no idea what to say to you right now. I totally forgot my line. And she goes, well, you may not know what to say to me right now, but I'll tell you this. And she just kept going. And I'm like, oh, and we got back on track. So it happens. But if you know it well enough, you know where you're going. So what I was going to do with this, one of the techniques that I use in order to kind of break up the speech, so it's not just this blah, 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 is I will write my speech and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it, and then I end up with writing all over it because I'll print it out, I'll write it and take notes and everything. But there's 2 things I'll do with my speech, and one of the things that I'll do, like Tiffany says, is practice where you're moving. So I will write, and I use pencil because I end up erasing it and moving other places, but I'll say C for center stage. Here's my opening, I'm going to say C for center stage. And then at this point, I'm going to move to the right. So I just put an R and I put right. Now when I'm practicing it, and maybe I'll cross half left on the next point or whatever. Whatever notes you use that works for you. I use acting notes, but you can use something else. Because I still call it blocking, but other people call it stage mapping. However you want to do it is fine. But then now when those moments when I'm actually practicing the speech, not just going through it, not driving, but maybe walking your dog or your lizard, is that when you're going through it, you're like, okay, start center, and I'm going to say this part. So you say this part, you look down, and you go, okay, now I'm going to move stage right. So now I'm going to say this part over here. And you practice your movement with your speech. That does 2 things. 1, it helps you move and remember to move when you're on stage. 2, it triggers your brain to help remember the words. Because sometimes you go, I don't know what I'm supposed to say now. But then you move this way, because oh, no, I'm supposed to go over here to the right. Right, and then your brain somehow remembers because the movement is connected to the words. It also breaks things up. So when you're looking at a 7-minute speech, which is a couple pages long, then you go, this is so long, it's so much to memorize. Well, now you're just memorizing in chunks. Oh, here's the section I'm going to memorize when I'm standing center. Here's the section I'm going to memorize when I'm right. Here's the section I'm going to memorize when I'm running through the audience. Then it becomes much easier for your brain to kind of take those little chunks. And psychologically, that helps you because it feels like you've finished. Like if I just learned this the other day, this fast. If I do da 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 da, Right, everybody has to finish that. Right? You're like, oh, don't stop. Which is why if you get a song stuck in your head, try and sing the end of the song, because then it closes out. Your brain has to finish that. So if we're looking at a whole speech, we get really, it really seems overwhelming to go, oh, I gotta do this whole speech, because we're never at the end. But if we have a whole bunch of different endings and chunks in our brain, we go, ha, good, okay, I got the conclusion done. Now we have that success, our brain can kind of shut that off, and then we go to the next point, and then we go to the next point. And then we have all the points we put together. The other note that I have on working on a speech, whether you memorize it or not, what a lot of people do is they'll start the speech, and you're kind of practicing the speech, and then you kind of get to point one, and then you're like, ah, shoot, no, I moved right, I was supposed to move left, now I can't remember what I was going to say, and you come back and you start all over again, while you're practicing in your bedroom or whatever. Don't start all over again, pick up where you left off, because what'll happen is the first part of your speech is really rehearsed and practiced, and the end of your speech you've gone through like 4 times, because you've had to keep starting over, because halfway through the speech you kept feeling like it wasn't connecting, so you wanted to start over. Finish, every time you start, once you get to that point where you can get through the whole speech, even if it's rough, if you stumble somewhere where you're practicing, finish it anyway. That way the end is just as important as the beginning. Because I've seen a lot of great beginnings of speeches, and then the endings, and they go, so, yeah, thank you.
I'm totally done that. I'm totally done that.
And you'll see it at VETC within the next month. You're going to get one of those. And you're all going to laugh, as long as it's not you. The other thing that I'll do on my written out piece of paper, you could also, if you just want to do it completely online, that's fine. Use a notepad or highlights or something like that that you use. However you want to code it is fine. But every time there's a pause, then I'll put a slash between the lines. So if I said Y and I wanted to pause at Y, I'll put a slash. That way I'm rehearsing as I'm going through it. I'm like, oh yeah, I wanted to pause here for effectiveness. If I want to have a big pause, I'll put 2 slashes. If I want to have a really big pause, I'll put 3 slashes, just so my brain visually knows right here. That way, what's going into your long-term memory is not just the words, but the movement and the pauses. Now, it may be different when you come out and you deliver on stage, which is totally okay. But you're practicing in different ways. That's why I do it in pencil. You might change it up a lot as you're going through it. You might be like, oh, that's a good idea. Wait, I want to do it this way instead. If there's a word you want to emphasize, underline it. If there's a word you want to say quiet, maybe you circle it. Use those different things with pencils or highlighters or different colored pencils. Yeah, that's right. To be able to sort of create this piece of art is really what we're doing. And then when you're done with your speech, which I forgot to bring one that I had carved up, but when you see it, if you do type everything out, which I recommend you do, is I've got highlighted notes, I've got pencil notes, I've got arrows, I've got rewritten things, because when I write it and then when I speak it, it comes out differently. I'm like, that sounds really formal. So I want to change that up a little bit, so I'll rewrite what I'd rather say. And so it's a mess. Like nobody can read it but I. Nobody can read it but I can read it. But do that, follow that. Probably takes work, but it also creates a much better speech. And if we're here to serve the audience, then we want to deliver the best information, inspiration that we possibly can. Like a lot of such people aren't wasting their time. Any questions on that? Yes.
Yeah, so I know there's no formula to walking around the stage.
Yeah.
You can't do it for every speech.
Yeah.
What works well in that?
That's a good question, and I will say, and some people would disagree with me on this. Some people say, as a general rule, I will teach this, but then as I say, as you start to get some speeches under your belt, then you can get creative with it. Start center stage, and then first point, stage right, middle point, center stage, third point, stage left, conclusion, center stage. So center, right, center, left, center. And the reason why I hear that is people say, well, people read right to left, but if different languages and people read differently, if you're reading, you know, like Chinese, if you're going down like this, you can't really, you know. So there's some variables in there. But usually what I say is the only rule that I have for movement is one, don't move too much. Don't get happy feet and just start wandering. I would rather have somebody stand still and deliver an exceptional speech than be continually wandering without purpose. Second, my conclusion, I've always ended, I can't think of a reason why I would not end a conclusion on center stage. 95% of the time, I will start a speech center stage as well, because you're owning the stage.